I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Aful Explorer. We're going to try and get through this one without making any jokes about the brand's name. But what this is Aful's latest IEM, and I believe it's also their most affordable at 120 bucks. And what this is like their other IEMs, or most of their other IEMs, it's a hybrid IEM. It's got a dynamic driver for the bass, it's got 2 balanced armatures versus 4 and 8 for their other more prominently known IEMs. And well, I think this IEM is actually kind of getting slept on a little bit. Now, I've heard, I think all of Aful's other IEMs before, and they're all pretty solid. They're all pretty solid IEMs, but they're all also kind of all pretty similar in their tuning philosophy. They're all kind of going for neutral with a little bit of a sub-bass boost. The Explorer that we've got here on the table is a departure from that. And I think it's a welcome departure. Not only do I think it's a welcome departure, I would honestly say I think this is my favorite IEM that they've made to date, just because it's kind of unique and it does what it does quite well. And what it does is bass. We're going to talk about that. So for the past few weeks, I've been living with the Explorer, listening to it and comparing it with some other IEMs in its price range. And today I'm ready to let you know what I think. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about what you get inside the box. We'll talk about the fit and the form factor, all that good stuff. Then, of course, we'll talk about the sound and how it compares directly with some competitors at the same price range. And of course, at the end, we're going to give it a score. So if you're in for that, stick around. That's what we're going to do. With that out of the way, a quick shout out to Hi-Fi Go for sending the Explorer in for review. If you want to check out the Aful Explorer, I've got Hi-Fi Go linked down below. With that out of the way, let's jump to the table and just dive into, we'll start with the packaging, what you get inside the box. Here is the box. It is nice and simple and small. I dig it. Not much more to say about it. And what you get inside of it is pretty simple, straight to the point, but pretty good quality stuff actually for $120 price range. Let's start with the boring stuff, the tips. And I say boring, but they're pretty decent tips. These are pretty typical tips, pretty standard basic tips, but what's notable is that they include 2 different styles. What's interesting though is that both of the styles are basically the same. You have a full set of ear tips in clear and a full set in clear with a blue core. The texturing on them is slightly different, so you might find some preferences between them, but I have a feeling that mostly people are going to pick these based on which visually they like with their IEM, and that's okay. I'm okay with that. I support that. All right. Apart from that, you get a little carry case, and I actually really like this little carry case because it is a functional size. Like, you can put your IEMs in here, they will fit. But it's kind of a compact, tight fit, so you can also still put this in your pocket. It maybe be a little bit big for a pocket, but about as small as you can get with an IEM case, and I dig that. One thing that might not come across here in the video is the texturing. Well, it's definitely not going to come across, but it's got like this kind of matte, soft, almost a rubberized texture, but it feels like they're trying to emulate leather. I don't know. Whatever it is, I think it's cool. It looks, I think, also pretty cool. They've got the brand there embossed in it. And then, of course, it's a zippered pouch. Oh, there's all your other tips. Got a little a little pouch in there for your accessories, which maybe I should have put mine in. And then you've got some felt lining. So a pretty nice little case, but we won't talk about that too much more. Instead, let's focus on the IEM itself and let's push this stuff to the side. Start talking about the build quality on this IEM, starting with the cable. And as Aful is wont to do, they've included a very nice cable in with this IEM. Unfortunately, I didn't really use it, and we'll talk about why, but I would have liked to because it's a nice cable. Maybe a little bit on the thick side and a little bit memory prone, but just barely. And generally, I think it's a really nice looking cable. Behavior on it is, apart from those minor quibbles, quite good. I'll give it the old Rody wrap so you can take a look. And that little bit of extra thickness in it, I think just helps it stance pretty good. And I'm all into stancing my IEMs. Maybe one day I'll do a video on exactly how to stance your IEMs. But yeah, generally pretty much like this cable. Here's the reason I'm not using it, is the one that got sent to me is a 4.4 mil balance. You can get this in a 3.5 mil single-ended connector, and I encourage you to, because I think balanced is a meme. But if you're into balance, you can get it like that. The Y-split hardware, nice and small. It's got a chin cinch, which is actually functional and stays in place. One of the best. Love that. And of course, you've got your preformed ear hooks and standard 2-pin connectors. So if for whatever reason you need to replace this cable, you want to replace this cable, should be pretty easy to find replacements for it. I guess I will point out that the connector on this guy is not recessed at all, just kind of a flush connector. So it should work with pretty much any cable, although the fit will be a better match if the cable also doesn't have like a protrusion on it, like the stock cable. But that will bring us into talking about the earpieces. And I think these are pretty handsome looking little earpieces. Again, remember, this is a $120 IEM, so basically an entry level is what I'm gonna call this. Not quite budget, but I'm gonna call this entry level in this price range. And what you're getting is, I think, a really handsome look. It's a nice semi-custom shell. It's a little bit on the small side. I'll show you what it looks like in my ear in a little bit, but I would describe this as like a medium small size. Let me take the ear tip off so you can see the nozzle length, which is not too aggressive. And like Awful's other IEMs, they don't use a protective screen over the top, which is an interesting choice. Although here you can see that there are some filters. Those are basically typical like balanced armature, like Knowles filters or something like that. But that's what they've got there instead of your more typical screen or mesh. But yeah, I don't know. Generally, I dig it. I dig the aesthetic. They are, I want to guess that they're solid because they don't feel like super lightweight. But of course, they're not super heavy as well because they are an acrylic plastic of some sort. But yeah, there's just a nice depth to the design. It's simple. I know it's glittery and maybe some people aren't into super glittery designs, but man, there's a lot of stuff out there that's, I think, a lot more gaudy. And this just comes across quite well, and it matches the cable really well, which I appreciate. Now, let me show you what this thing looks like inside my ear as I talk about the fit, which is one of my favorite things about this IEM is I love the way this thing fits. You can see in my ear, as I mentioned, it's kind of a medium small fit. So it is not taking up a lot of room in my concha bowl, so I don't feel any like outer pressure just in like this sort of part of my ear. And because it is semi-custom molded, the fit security and stability is quite solid. It stays fit, or it stays in place even when I'm sleeping, and I do sleep in my IEM, so this thing has made it through many a nights, staying put in my ears, and yeah, that much I appreciate. Now, it does seem like it isolates pretty aggressively. I don't know, I haven't really tested the sealing or the pressure. I haven't had issues with the pressure, and because it does have a dynamic driver in there, I assume there is some venting of some, yeah, there's a vent here toward the front. I'm not particularly sensitive to venting, which is why I'm a little wishy-washy there in that initial intro, but I know some people are, and I guess it's important there that you've got a vent. And like I said, I didn't have any issues with the venting on this IEM, but it does seal enough that it's possible that if you're especially affected by occlusion effect, this one might be a little bit stronger than average, but I don't know. Generally really happy with the fit and comfort, the aesthetic. Kind of love everything about the physicality of this IEM. But you're asking, what does it sound like? Let's talk about what this thing sounds like. And we're going to start like I have been. Hold on, let me grab my controls so I can actually do this properly. We're going to go over to, oh no, this is not working. Hold on 1 second. I promise you this will be quick. I got to fix something. But we're going to take a look as the frequency response, all right? There we go. Magic. Okay. Here's the frequency response of the Aful Explorer as measured on my rig. If you want to take a look at this for yourself, I've got it on Squig Link right now, linked in the description down below. But of course, we're going to talk through it right now. And what you see here on this graph is a squiggly line. Basically, what you should read into this, because this is what I think it sounds like, and I think where the frequency response is doing a good job of illustrating that, is that this is a warm, kind of bassy IEM. You can see that there is some elevation here in the low end and the bass, and while it is mostly focused into the sub bass, as is pretty common these days, it's not entirely deprived of mid bass, okay? This right here, you can see this light dotted line. This is like the Harman target curve, which is generally regarded as pretty mid-bass light. And as you can see, the curve here on the Aful Explorer is skating in above the Harman target. So I wouldn't describe this as a thin IEM, even though it is still a sub-bass focus boost. And then what's also interesting about this is the top end. So a little bit relaxed up here in the upper mid-range, and this is kind of where your the meat of your vocals is, all right? So if you've got more forwardness in the frequency response here, vocals are gonna sound a little bit more forward of a lot of the instruments, at least typically. It varies by song, so it's not a hard and fast rule. but typically that's the effect you get. And when you get a little bit of a relaxation here, where this line comes in below these targets, you're gonna have the vocal sounding a little bit more a part of the mix, or maybe even like a little bit behind the mix. So that's interesting. And then the other thing that's kind of interesting is the treble performance. Is it's very smooth, as you can see up here, as well as it doesn't quite extend as much as you might like to see in the upper air frequencies. And it's interesting, as I see this in pretty much everyone's graphs of the Explorer, but to my ear, it doesn't sound especially rolled off. And I think that's an important thing to point out as we're here looking at the graph, is that while the Aful Explorer does look like it graphs without much air frequencies, in listening impressions, I thought that the treble timbre was actually really quite well done. In fact, the treble is one of the reasons I like this IEM quite a bit. You know that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of a lot of bass in IEMs, and that's not because I dislike bass. It's because a lot of the times bass comes at the expense of the other stuff that I like more. In this case, I really don't think that's the case. So yeah, we'll talk a little bit more about my subjective impressions, but just here focusing on this, one thing I did want to point out is that I have the impression, my understanding, I guess kind of what I'm taking away from this graph, is that the slight recession that we have here in the upper mid-range is making the presence of the treble, even though the treble presence is appearing to be pretty relaxed and maybe even on the dark side, I have a feeling that this pulled back upper mid-range is actually kind of having a reverse masking effect, and is giving that treble a little bit more extra presence than what you see in the graph here. So that's not to say that it's not still somewhat of a dark sounding IEM that is bass dominant. I would say that that is a fair understanding of the tonality of this IEM. But what that is to say is that it's not like an overly warm, dense, muddy kind of sound. And that's where we're going to get into talking about my personal just kind of impressions and what I like about the sound in this IEM. And let's start with the bass, because I know a lot of people are going to be interested in this IEM for the bass, and I think that's a good reason. That's actually, again, I mentioned I like this IEM because it's kind of unique amongst what Aful's been doing. They've been doing mostly neutral with a little bit of sub bass boost. And this guy is just a bassy, warm, dense guy versus the more leaner, more neutral, lively other Aful IEMs. And they've done it really well. The bass is quite solid on this thing. It's got a nice impact in it. And again, it's not overly focused on the sub bass so that you don't have a nice impact in kick drums. You do. You get the impact with the kick drums, and it's really satisfying. And then through the mid-range, yeah, I do hear that the vocals are a little bit on the pulled back side. If you're looking for a set that is really vocal forward and focused, the Explorer is not going to be that, okay? But I'm okay with that, right? I like having a library of IEMs I can go and listen to for specific things. And if I'm listening for vocals, probably not going to be this guy. But if I'm listening for the other aspects of audio, this guy's pretty satisfying. And then we get to the treble, which again, I described as pretty smooth. And that is, the treble execution on this guy is really, really pretty impressive. It does have a little bit of extra sparkle and bite that adds some definition to the transients. And I think that helps deal with what might otherwise be, or what you might understand by looking at the frequency response, to be kind of a dense, dark, warm, thick, soupy sound, because it's not that at all. There's a really strong sense of clarity on this guy, but it's not because of overly forward treble that is strident or anything like that. It's just kind of a nice, relaxed treble performance that it does the job. It's got a fastness to it. It's not necessarily going to give you like the most wide stereo image, which I find like a brighter, livelier sound signature tends to give. But this does give you, because of that bass, a nice deep sense of that stereo head stage, I suppose. And because of that, I generally find this IEM really satisfying. I know it's only 120 bucks. I understand 120 bucks is not super cheap for a lot of people. But in the IEM game, 120 bucks, again, I would describe this as kind of entry level. Despite this being an entry level IEM, and me having access to a ton of IEMs, this is one that's spent a lot of time in my ears over the past few weeks because I like it. It's unique. It does something unique. And getting this for 120 bucks, frankly, again, I think people are kind of sleeping on this IEM. Is it my absolute favorite IEM at this price range? Probably not, but you might not like my favorite IEM. And what this is might be more at your taste. And just to put that into context, let's pull in some other IEMs at around this price range and talk about how they compare, okay? So what we've got here on the table, obviously we've got the Explorer. Here we've got Awful's latest or previous IEM, which is the MagicOne. This one came in at, I believe, 140 bucks. It's a single balanced armature. Over here we've got, of course, the Truth Ear Hexa. This is the cheapest one on the table. Also a hybrid IEM. I believe it's a 3 balanced armature, 1 dynamic driver. Only 80 bucks. Quite the bargain. And then over here, this is actually the quite aged, but at this point still pretty impressive Fiio FH3. Also a hybrid IEM. I believe this is 2 balanced armature, single dynamic driver. So same driver configuration as the Explorer. And price range is pretty similar, although I know that because this one's been out for a while, the price tends to fluctuate between 100 and 130 bucks. All right, let's quickly do, I don't know, how do we want to break this down? In terms of like base levels and warmth, I'm going to say that the Explorer is the warmest. And then honestly, these are kind of like different. I'll call the FH3 as the next bassiest. The Hexa would be there. And then the MagicOne is the least bassy. Why I was a little bit hesitant on these two is that the bass on the FH3 is more sub-bass focused, and it's also a little bit livelier in the treble than is the Hexa. And so that gives this a little bit more of a brighter tilt than something like the Hexa, which I find to be kind of like a warm, relaxing neutral. So not quite as much bass boost on this guy, but because it overall has that slightly warmer tilt, it does give you maybe a slightly denser, warmer sound than this, while this is going to give you more of that sub-bass bounce. The Explorer is kind of like a combination of both of those. If you want that warm mid-range, plus you want that sub-bass boost with a really nice fun bounce, well, the Explorer is going to give that to you. Versus the FH3, I would say that the FH3 does give me more of that stereo width versus the Explorer. In fact, I would say that if we were just ranking them in terms of stereo width, I'd probably say the FH3 is ahead of all three of these. These three are all kind of in the same ballpark in terms of that technical performance. But yeah, there you go. And then in terms of like vocal performance, again, I said, if you're in it for the vocals, the Hexa is going to be #1. Maybe followed up by the MagicOne, to be honest. And these two are kind of, I don't know, maybe this is like the least vocal focused of the bunch, but hopefully that gives you a good idea of where these IEMs stack up. If I'm buying one for myself, it's going to be the Hexa all day, but you probably already knew that. I'm a warm neutral head, and that's what the Hexa does. This guy, in fact, when I was bringing this out for comparisons with these other IEMs, I just found myself like I was going between the IEMs, A, B, C, D, A, B, C, D, and then I would just land on the Hexa and kind of get stuck listening to it for a while because I like it that much, but that is neither here nor there. My second pick, honestly, would probably be this guy, the Explorer. I like this guy. For a while, the FH3 has kind of been my go-to sub $150 bassy pick, and it's still, again, surprisingly good at the price range, but I do think that the Explorer is just a more polished version. Maybe not quite as strong in the imaging, and if that's what you're after, maybe you might still prefer the FH3, but personally, there's something about this that draws me to it that I find I'm probably going to be listening to this thing after the review. And for an IEM in the entry-level price range, that's kind of standout. Out of 5 stars, I'm going to give the Aful Explorer a very solid 4 stars. And if you want to check it out, of course, I got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and join me on Discord. I've got Discord linked as well. We've got a great community of people having great conversations about audio, and you can get some of my thoughts on these things before I do the review. It's a little spoiler there, a little cheat sheet. But anyway, I'll catch you in the next supper review. Ooh, it is supper time. I'll catch you in the next supper review. Cheers.
Join with the force of reviews. We now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit. It's the